Well, welcome to another edition of Public Affairs, Public Access at the Houston Media Source. I'm your host, Robert McKinley Gilmore Sr. We've got a dynamic roundtable discussion dealing with mental health. We certainly have a great need in our society, particularly in the Houston-Harris County area. We're basically looking at a year away from when we had one of the most significant storms to ever hit this particular Gulf Coast region in almost 30 years. Hurricane Harvey, and we are certainly in this particular period of time still in recovery, but we are glad to be here at the Houston Media Source celebrating. I've got a dynamic round table. I'm going to let them introduce themselves right now.
And I'm glad to be here. I'm attorney Lori Chambers Gray, and I think you have a relevant topic tonight.
And hi, I'm Dr. Rashida P. Ryan. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist with Future Behavioral Health, and yeah, I mean that's my area. So I'm excited to hear what we're going to talk about today.
My name is Reginald Gordon. I'm a peer recovery coach specialist here in the city of Houston. I'm also a prevention officer dealing with at-risk youth.
I'm glad to be able to share again a definition by the World Health Organization. I've been doing this now for a couple of years because I think when we define mental health, it should be clear enough where people understand what you should be impacted by or what would trigger you or what you need to be aware of with a loved one, a friend, or colleague. Just recently we had a couple of shootings, one on a job and one in the local community, which reflects how people can be so easily impacted by the actions of others. But anyhow, the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. I guess into my roundtable panelists, I guess in thinking about the hurricane, that's as they say, a a natural event. And this hurricane or all the incidents we see around the country, the fires in California, I think they're currently on the East Coast, raging storms, tornadoes. It really triggers a lot in terms of people's stability to function because you don't control it. You couple that with the problems we suffer in our society from suicide and addiction, and it just exacerbates your ability to consider the word normal. And I guess that is where I want to begin, because when you say mental health, you really are talking about normal. And so, is there such a thing today in our society with the kind of stresses and natural or unnatural? Is there such a thing as normal?
I think normal is like on an individual basis when we talk about, what's normal for you may be normal for someone else. And definitely in the work that I do, I travel throughout the community and I meet people of all walks of life. And what their norms is so different from mine. And it's kind of like, even when you talk about what's normal, some people have gotten so used to, for lack of a better term, crazy, that it has become their new normal. I've dealt with certain patients who have sons who have attacked them or shot them, and it's like, it's almost like a norm. It's not like something out of the ordinary, and I'm looking like your son attacked you, and that's kind of normal to you. And they're like, well, I just can't deal with him every day because of his temper. You know what I'm saying? It's just that whole notion of we've become so accustomed to so much that everybody's normal is different. So it's hard to say. It is hard to say what can we consider normal. And this is why when we talk about mental health, it really is, at what point can you no longer function as you normally would like to? That's how we can measure what's normal and what's not. Because otherwise, what's normal for me may not be for you. And if I'm treating you based on my norm, it may not be effective.
So is the culture a factor when you start thinking about or talking about individuals who have to deal with their loved ones on the job, or is culture a major factor?
It is a major factor. Culture, whether we're talking about socioeconomic level, whether we're talking about religious beliefs or in terms of race, ethnicity, it all depends. And again, I work with all age, generational. It's funny that I work, my youngest patient is I think 5, my oldest one is 96. And so you can imagine the level of differences in what is considered normal, not normal, what, this is what you want accomplished while we work together, or this is what's, anxious for you, this makes you depressed. It all varies. Yes.
I was thinking though, it's really a new normal for us to even have this conversation, because I can just remember when I started in the practice of law, it wasn't one of the things, there wasn't, say, a separate department that actually would be available to assist persons on probation, for example, that needed mental health. There may have been a doctor that you could find somewhere that could maybe do an evaluation. But now there are teams of sociologists and psychologists who are on board now to try and help work through persons who are going through the criminal justice system. So I think that we're now talking about it a bit more, and there isn't that stigma.
That it will be addressed
Exactly.
differently, as
Exactly.
opposed to in the past when there was no consideration. There was no consideration of mental illness. The recent case where the man killed his wife and the 2 children. She was pregnant, by the way. The wife was pregnant, and killed them. And then he stood there in front of the camera and basically said that he had a problem. And I'm saying that because the problem he had was that he wanted his wife to come back, fully knowing that he had killed her. And now, a day or so later, the statement is that he killed her because she had killed the other 2 kids. That's yet to come. But he didn't have a diagnosis of mental illness. The criminal justice system is going to, I'm assuming, judge him based upon the state he's in, which is normal. You understand what I'm saying, Mr. Gordon? Normal. He was normal. He doesn't have a diagnosis.
Well, I'm getting on this topic where when you started out dealing with normal,
Right?
And as me and the research that I love to do, I love to do research, and one of my greatest psychologists and doctors was Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. And she spoke of some things dealing with black people, African American people. And one of the questions I asked, I just was blessed to be traveled down by the border, and I was informed, and I did a 3-day training on trauma informed care. That was the training. And I wanted to ask the doctor that went to one of the major universities there, dealing with African Americans in America. And I asked her this question: is trauma passed down through DNA? So for us, so when she told me yes, trauma is passed through DNA. So we all crazy if we here in America, we living here and we black. So normal for us is not. We don't know what normal is, living up under white supremacy. Do we know what normal is, living up under white supremacy? Because we're so traumatized from my daddy's issues, granddaddy's issues.
Wait. So you bring it in a
different.
biological.
Yeah, that's different.
I know the courts haven't got that yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
So, now you, Dr. Rivera, you
agree.
You readily agree with him.
I do.
Why are you agreeing with Gordon?
No, I'm like, I just think that we have so many issues, and a lot of deals with how we feel about ourselves. And we're not, we have the problems everybody else has, like trying to, work, family. But then we have, how do we feel about ourselves as being black people? Yes, I took several kids to go see Black Panther, and I remember riding in the car, and I made a joke about how I thought how handsome Michael B. Jordan and Chadwick Boseman were, and one of the little girls was like, "Oh, not Chadwick Boseman, he's black." And I'm like, the whole cast was black, so what do you mean by black? And she was like, because he's dark skinned. So I said, so because he's dark skinned, that makes him automatically not attractive. And she was like, well, yeah. like, well, how could you think he's nice looking? Now, granted, she was the same color as he
Right,
was.
right.
So I was like, so does that mean that you think you're unattractive? That you don't think you're beautiful? And she just got real quiet. And she said it, she was a 9-year-old, and she said it so matter of fact, like that was just a fact, not like, this is my opinion. She
Right.
said it like it was a fact.
It's already in her DNA.
It's already in her DNA that she already felt that if you are of a certain hue, you cannot be seen as attractive.
And she was of that hue.
And she was exactly of that hue.
That's what you talk about, God.
Definitely, and I
Your
think
DNA concept.
I think until we get down to what the issue is and dealing with the core problems when we come into trying to maneuver our way through America, as black people, we have to go back to the pain. You know, I'm reading this powerful book by Terry Wilson right now,
Right.
and it says black pain. It just looked like we not hurting.
Right.
And that's a good observation. It looks like we are not going through anything. And I'm going back to what Dr. Gilmore was saying about the person. He's only alleged. He's not convicted
Right,
of
yeah.
murdering his family.
Right.
But when he matter of factly stood there and said, well, he was expecting her to come home.
Right.
He was waiting for her to come back home.
Right. But
And-
he knew what the bodies
and-
were.
But he looked
Like
from
he-
that interview
yeah.
like he was, and at any moment,
Yeah.
she could be driving up and heading back home. He didn't look, you know, what we would typically think of some person that was actually.
Right.
You know, quote unquote, he looked crazy or he looked insane. He didn't
Exactly.
have that appearance. And
No.
I'm glad you brought that up because that does piggyback on what you're saying too, that often we become accustomed to pain, that everyone expects it. Like, you know, when something tragic happens, I notice in TV, you might have noticed it too on the news.
Right.
If something tragic happens to a black family, like the black family that lost almost all their members in that boat crash.
Right.
They interviewed the survivor members like almost the same, like a couple hours later.
Right.
They never would have done it to a white family. I just don't see them like,
Right.
I'm interviewing immediately after you just lost all your family. And expect you to be coherent, expect you to, to talk about it. And I say that in the sense that people are so used to seeing us in pain, I'm talking about the world, including ourselves, that we just kind of accept that's the lot of life that we have, that we will always experience some type of pain, some type of hardship, that it becomes the norm. So I definitely, of course, I love Dr. Francis Creswell. So, but going through generations, and again, with the kind of people of the community that I work with, because I work, with a lot of my people, work with a lot of different people. But what I find is that with us, we are very unique in going back to the question of what is normal, what's not, and how we define it, and the kind of lives that we live. That anyone else looking at their lives, how can you even function? How can you function?
How can you function?
Yes.
Well, let me add I went to the 9th annual Community Drug Awareness Conference sponsored by the Houston-Harris County Office of Drug Policy, which was held over at HBU last week. And I was thrown back by the new numbers. I think it was 74,000 last year who died from drug deaths. They did not have drug overdose, and what they gave in the document was the opioid addictions that have driven this huge increase. We talking huge, more than the war in Vietnam, more deaths than in from AIDS. I mean, just the numbers are phenomenal when they put drug deaths and overdose together. It's almost 240,000 a year, and so there's such a thin line between what killed you. You ran the car over the bridge or whatever the case. And some of the figures that were shared also said there's a new sense of treatment in America because, of course, now we have 30 some odd states who accept medicinal marijuana and medicinal types of use. There's, of course, several states which now have legalized recreational marijuana, which no longer, from a legal perspective, is viewed as being negative because most of the district attorneys now are using different levels of treatment. We're no longer in a drug war, Mr. Gordon, where you get found with one joint, you get 20 years. It has to be 4 ounces minimum. in Harris County, which is quite a bit when you start talking about walking down the street with 4 ounces, all you get is a ticket. So we're in a new era, I guess I'm trying to say. So the norm has changed. This is now the norm because I hate to tell you, I'm gonna show you the picture, but any one of y'all can make a comment, but all the pills are legal pills. They're
Of course.
sold in pharmacies. They're no longer cooked, except for methamphetamine, but
Yes.
they're sold at the pharmacy.
Well, there's been a problem. I mean, there's been a problem in the African American community with crack, cocaine.
Right.
There has been that problem, but there has been not the push for rehabilitation, and that's always been something that I believe that needed to have a discussion. How do we get past it? So what I'm happy to hear you say is, and to see in the media, that people are now talking about we can't just criminalize this behavior and not do anything about it. There needs to be some concerted effort to try to address the problem, the addiction problem, because we've seen that in the African American community for years, the devastation. That's why the numbers, I mean, we had the numbers with more young men in prison versus in college. The devastation to the family, the devastation to the community has been ongoing.
And I guess one observation you're making, which really exacerbates it, is that in some ways when I was sitting there, I was thinking that I was in another conference because the word crack was never mentioned.
It's not the epidemic that it used to be. It really is about the opioids. And then there's the other side. Like I have a sister who has sickle cell anemia, and she's in a lot of pain. She can't get the pain meds she used to get because now doctors, pharmacists are all afraid. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to prescribe you that because I don't know if you are addicted or you really need it. So
Really?
she suffers a lot. So, and I also have several patients who have severe pain disorders, and they're having a hard time. And I think a lot because they're Black. And then because it's such an epidemic that people are now afraid. Doctors don't lose their license. Pharmacists don't want to be accused of so it's become, just, I don't know what we can do to resolve it, because you have on one hand people who are addicted to it, then there are people who actually need it, because that's where opiates came from in the first place. And what has happened is that people who need it are suffering because out of fear that you can't be addicted to this, so I better not prescribe this to you, but there's no alternative at this point, which is why I'm glad, they're now legalizing marijuana in more and more places, because people are finding it does help people who have pain. Not in Texas yet, but, hopefully in time.
Again, we seen it coming. We turned a deaf eye when they started putting CVS across the street from Walgreens in our community. During the crack cocaine movement, we knew that crack cocaine was legally, the evidence, the facts have been shown. Crack cocaine was legally targeted for our community to destroy young Black men. One of my great authors, again, lawyers, Michelle Alexander, brought attention to us, the movement that was coming our way. We know that right now, the reason why I am a recovery coach today, because I seen after coming out of prevention that the finances, the resources was going to go towards what's happening to little white boys and little white girls across America dying from pills. Now the issue have become a problem. Rehabs are being built. I got pictures. I went, I visit a beautiful, residential treatment center today with beautiful classroom, beautiful TVs, getting all around top grade treatment for their opioid problems that I still don't see in 3rd Ward, 4th Ward, 5th Ward due to the crack epidemic that's still there, that we still don't want to do nothing about. But again, we have to become more open to say that, just like with the school shooting issue that we're dealing with around America, that we see that the rush to help, for the rush for resources, the governor just this week donated another $1.5 million towards Santa Fe School for mental illness programs. On top of the $6 million that they already received at that school there. I went to a 2-justice panel committee this week, and the good brother, Jay Jordan of the ACLU, brought up a overview on dealing with the juvenile justice system that I'm perfect, that's my love, that's my baby, dealing with the juvenile justice. He brought out the point that school shootings have brought about a panic in America. And what happened right here at Santa Fe with the young people being shot up and killed in Santa Fe, over the summer, they came up with a commission report on dealing with gun violence. The mayors, the cities, the county, sit down. The answer to that problem on school gun violence was to put more police in these schools to deal with the problem. Well, Jay, the lawyer that's been dealing with Harris County juvenile detention, shows that in the last 10 years, juvenile violence have went down in the city. But the population in the juvenile jail has bust the seams of the jail that we have downtown due to the over-policing of our children in the schools. So they're criminalizing our babies, shooting them through these school systems to the jailhouse, building that prison, school to prison pipeline, because right now they're in the process of building a new jail for the juveniles right here on Chimney Rock. So we have to really get engaged in finding out what's really happening in our community from the drug war that's never was really addressed, because we still make up the number of proportions in jail. Misdemeanor small crimes, marijuana cases are still in jail when they're still smoking it and selling it in California.
Yeah, it's true. Well, wait a minute. So the idea now is being exacerbated. So as a psychologist, how do you view that? Seems like some insanity.
But I mean, you said so many things, but but it goes back to where you started with the whole normal thing. I think as a whole, society believes that a lot of the behaviors that we have in the African American community are normal. So we don't need to treat it. So if you kill each other, that's what you're supposed to do. If we commit crimes against each other, that's what we're supposed to do. If we get high, that's us. But if any other race does it, that's something, we got to look into. We got to see, why would they do that? Why would they kill someone? Why would they, choose to get high? Or why would they kill themselves? Black kids can do the same kind of behaviors on a daily basis and no one even bats an eye. And that deals a lot with what we perceive as what is normal. And a lot of it comes from, the historic system of oppression in this society. So when you said all of that, I can't argue with any of that, because at the end of the day, our kids suffer because people do not see them as human.
And that leads me to think about what is valuable, what is important, what matters. And does our lives
matter?
Yeah.
I mean, we had 100 lives matter. Humans matter.
Yes.
But when we place that value on our lives, then we begin to the whole sanctity of our lives, the sacredness of our lives. We begin to examine, what do we do in order to improve them, to improve things. So what can we do? I suppose that's the question.
In the military, I'm a veteran. In the military, I learned a concept called collateral damage. I had no idea what it meant, none. And in addition to teaching me how to march, which was unique in terms of order and time management, getting up at 5:30, they taught that some of us might die. In the military, they said some of us might die, and it was a shock for them to explain that to me like that. Just matter of fact. Now we internalize it as veterans, military people, because you look around, you see hundreds of people, and you realize that some might not make it out, whether through training exercises or actual combat.
Friendly fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe we enter the era of us having to now accept the fact and accept even if it's inequitable. I mean,
But Doc, it's hard for me to grasp that because we have the best example of people that's not caught up in the circle that we're in. Right there on Bel Air Boulevard, the Asian American community deals with that until we figure out how to deal with our issue. Nobody can control and deal with black boys like black men can.
right.
That's our mental illness there, dealing with rejection. And a lot of times, 80% of our young boys suffer from what you call depression from being rejected from family members such as men and masculinity.
But then they go back to the point where you're making a supportive idea to this DNA issue?
Yes, I mean what you just said is the argument. Like if you compare us to say Asian Americans, they still have their culture. They were but we don't. So we don't even know what is our culture. So when you talk,
we're in a modern culture.
We're in a modern culture, but people still have their traditions.
Right.
We
But
say
some
we're mine all
people
day.
don't accept them, like you said with the young lady in the car. She didn't accept.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you said about the young lady in the car. Some people don't accept it because they've accepted the modern tradition. They're not going back.
Oh, they don't even see themselves as a part of that in the first place. It's not, they're not. They're like, how's that a Black Panther? Oh my God! I'm sorry. Such a good movie. I'm sorry.
I'm
Such a good movie.
I don't want to be triggered. Right off.
Yes. You need to go.
You do. It's a good movie.
But me as an example, I can use my own life as an example.
Okay.
Going to prison at 16, caught up in a lifestyle, single parent household, caught up in the gang lifestyle, did 20 years of my life in the dungeons of prison and dungeons of prison. I was able to recoup and regrow, reproduce, recreate a new me when I was there. But I had to go back to figure out who I am, whom I am, and where I came from. Once I figured out, learned how to read where I come from, what I was about, who I was produced from, looked at my daddy's history and his daddy's history, I became the man I am today.
Right.
But until we become serious about retraining our community to get down to the root cause of our problem, we can suffer a lot. We can get rid of a lot of our mental illness.
Right.
Because I think our mental illness relies on us not knowing who we is and not dealing with our root cause of our problems.
But doesn't that go back to the idea of when a person has committed some abnormality, I'm just going there for a minute, then you in the system, I'm just saying, you in the system cannot go back and say they need the therapy and whatnot. You got to address what has occurred today.
Yeah.
Like what Gardner's saying about what happened to him 25, 30 years ago. You still got to look at it right there. In other words, I know they've had several teenagers have been involved in some just hideous crimes. Not only in Houston, Chicago, New Orleans,
Across the board,
across the board.
Exactly.
Don't make no sense.
And that's what I will do, because when a person comes in and they're charged with a crime, I have to go all the way back.
Right.
Because I can never get to where we hope to go unless we've looked at what is in your history.
Right.
Do you have a history of certain mental health conditions?
Right.
Do you need an evaluation, a psych evaluation?
Where would you see from a legal perspective, where does the treatment plan really need to start?
Well, from the very beginning. From the very beginning. Because I mean,
True.
and many of the people that I've seen over my years in the practice, it sometimes takes being arrested before they would actually get in to see a psychiatrist to actually have an evaluation done.
And that's not considering if the person is self-medicating on some of these, because the self-medication idea and the fact of a person dealing with the pain issue.
Right.
That hasn't been resolved because they can't, think straight or whatever the case is.
But Dr. Gilmore, when we even when we're dealing with the peer burden, I'm saying, and like I said, the juvenile justice department is my baby, what I've been dealing with for the last 30 years. When we know that even when we diagnose our babies, we overdiagnose them or we underdiagnose them when they get in jail. When we know that when we overdiagnose them, there's a little bit more money come with them.
Right.
So if you got ADD, ADHD, if you got all mental disorder, if you got an angry disorder, all that piles on a little bit extra money when you get to jail. That's why we can get our babies in jail, and by the time they get out after spending 2 years in jail, they are worth $90,000 a year. Why in jail? Going through these 70% of our children that go through the juvenile justice system, 70% of them is diagnosed with a small form of mental disorder or a large form of mental disorder. So therefore, we have to really look at the system that our children are caught up under, because even when they go in there and somewhat normal, they come out with dysfunctional behaviors once they come out the system.
And then we have to look at the fact that, especially African American males, they've been, for African American males, when they're depressed, it manifests itself as anger.
Exactly.
They will never say I'm sad. They never say I'm upset.
Exactly.
And
it's easy to be angry.
Yes, and so they go around being angry. And I work with young males, and if I find it angry a lot, and I've had some young men who've had insight, and the more we talk, tears will start coming literally down their face, whether they realize it or not, as they talk about whatever pain it might be not having a father, or a father that's, in and out of their lives, or, feeling like I can't learn, I'm having trouble learning, and I want to play sports, but I can't play because my grades are not good enough, and so, what am I left with? Or that in a certain neighborhood where it's just rough. But you have to be that fighter. You have to be the one that fights. Most of those young men that fight a lot at school are actually very depressed individuals. Even though the school might see them as they're troublemakers, they have ADHD, don't want to be bothered, most of them actually have depression. And that is what I find. It's not even ADHD or ADD, because the bottom line is one of the main symptoms of depression is poor concentration and poor attention. So it will look like to everyone else that you are dealing with ADHD or ADD, but the truth of the matter is you're very depressed. So you can't function if you're really sad.
And as an state certified anger management counselor dealing with groups of young men all the time, especially black boys, it's much easier to deal with anger than to deal with your feelings. Because in America, you're looked at as being weak and somebody that you're sorry, you're lazy, you won't get, but we don't recognize depression when it comes to that level in dealing with black men, because we're not allowed to be depressed.
Well, but that isn't that the opposite though of the actual panic that has been put forth in the schools through these mass shootings? Because in many cases they have not been African Americans. I mean, they've been, kids who are white or whatnot.
Well, I got this article here dealing with childhood trauma, domestic violence coming from families where mothers and fathers coming through these domestic households to where we're so traumatized by the time we get to school. That's why in the jails, when I go in there, 60% of our boys can't read because they're so far behind in their reading level. So trauma starts at home up under domestic violent households. So when we just amplify when we go to these schools loaded with guns.
Well, we have to be able to say something to the status quo, because it seems like it's being exacerbated. I mean, will the courts within our lifetime address it the way it's being explained here? Because whether it's from the court perspective or from the state-approved psychological, psychiatric perspective, I know Nathaniel Higgins and some others, African-American psychiatrists, wrote a small version of the DSM-5 called Mind Matters, and that's what they're talking about. One of the psychiatrists was appointed to be the counselor for the NBA, and what they're basically saying is we trying to help identify these behaviors before they become full-blown diagnosis. I think I mentioned to you, Gordon, that to get a diagnosis, you got to have a consistency in the episode.
Yes.
Right.
So if you seeing your loved one at home, white, black, green, or yellow, then and they're being consistent over 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, is that then cause for intervention before you get this diagnosis, or you have this acted out problem or identified in school? Because at that point, stamp comes on,
And
wait a minute, Dr. Beaver, you was going to say something?
Only thing I was going to say, and I've said this before on this show and even in my everyday life, we need to do checkups like we do physical health. We make it a point to do annual physical checkups.
Right.
It needs to be done with mental health. We need to have periodic checkups as a part of a routine to make sure to see where we are, because I agree with you. It is about, if we're dealing with right now, then we have to figure out how can we prevent or intervene if they're at the lower levels of any of the disorders that we're talking about. So a school shooting like that wouldn't keep occurring, or when people are being violent toward each other themselves wouldn't continue to happen. So that's all I wanted to say. I agree with that. Like, it's about identifying those symptoms, and it can happen easily.
So it should have been a mental exam when they were getting the physical exam
Exactly.
with the immunizations.
Exactly.
For school. You finish,
Because
I'm
you
sorry.
can't go. You can't unless you have immunization. You can't even go to school unless you have immunization.
That's right. You
and it
can't
should
go
be
unless
the same with mental
That's
health.
right,
Like, did you get screened? So we need to know if you're dealing with depression, you're dealing with anxiety. We need to know all these things.
So the metal detector was not going to help you if
Exactly.
What you should say,
and then
counselor?
the other problem is, once you've gotten past, say, 18, and you think, and I've seen this a lot, well, I no longer need my medicine for ADHD. I'm out of school anymore. True. And then they stop all of the treatment and will not get treatment. So what happens? They commit a crime. And but if the family's trying to say, hey, look, there's a problem here with my 19-year-old who's not taking the medicine anymore. Where can I go? Because, well, he's 18. He gets the right to consent to his own, make his own decisions, and
legally.
At this point, you're between a rock and a hard place, because you know the next thing that's going to happen is he's going to commit a crime.
And that's a twofold.
And where do you go in that dilemma?
Wait a minute, Gordon. The conference I went to with the VA, they told veterans, because veterans are still committing suicide at 22 a day. It's still 22 a day. And these are people who are grown men, went into service for their country. I'm in that group. 1% came out affected, can't get no help. So they say call 211. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Again, how do we get past this? Because the black community got one of the hardest positions on taking a position, dealing with the stigma part of people coming out saying that I have a mental illness problem. You
have a mental illness.
Yeah, just for me to come out, especially black men, to come out and address my mental illness, it's much harder in our own community, stigmatizing black boys. And we know that taking this kind of record into the workforce, in the workplace, where, we always been on the last end on the unemployment regardless, trying to get work in the country. So we have a lot of different issues that we have to figure out if we gonna handle and deal with this thing called mental illness.
Well, that's why I like the term that the World Health Organization uses. I've been using it because it just basically says when a state of well-being which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, then you can cope with the normal stresses of life, and then you can work productively and fruitfully. That's why I like the definition, because it just gives me a kind of generic view of saying, okay, let me put this litmus test against myself and see where I am. Or let me put this against my cousin who's 26, can't read and write, saying he's going to be Beyonce and Jay-Z, and can't write a paragraph. Okay, I mean, that requires intervention. That means you've been going on for the last 5 years. No, before you turn 18, because you didn't learn how to read. And it's got to be intervention. That's why I think one of our base levels of identification has got to be in the community, in the church, mosque, synagogue, wherever we are and assemble, so that community members know, quit enabling this person. We're enabling too many people.
Because when you bring up the issue, where's the resources to get the help that they need?
That's a whole different world.
That's the question.
So when you identify these things, I mean, that's why people are afraid to go into that, because once you identify it, help is needed, and the resources are not there when it comes to our community.
Well, the resources
That's why I
are
come
there.
back to show you this beautiful book where I went today to show in the other area over there by Memorial, call it out. They have a nice facility for their children.
By what street? Well, we want to get Riverside Hospital fixed up on in it, supposedly. But I'm going to this idea then of the resources, because you made the point that the governor gave $1 million for police officers. All of a sudden, people can find money for other resources. You know, when the police officers are what you call it, little metal detectors and all this.
Well, Dr. Gilmore had in the last, when I was working for the state representative, Texas was 50th on the list when it comes to funding resources. Is
You
that
sure we're not 51? I know Hawaii. Pretty low, but they finna go through a huge storm this week.
so if Texas, one of the biggest states in the union, is 50th on the list funding mental illness, mental resources, where do we go?
That's a twofold, because on one hand, you can have resources and people still won't access it because it's so, you know, we do need more resources, but we have to get people open to the idea of even receiving those resources.
Where's
or
the
receiving
balance?
the help.
Where's the balance?
Yeah, and that's the hard part. It is about how, like you said, going back to the stigma, but how to normalize what people are going through. Like when we talk about when you say they get 18, they get off the medicine. My whole point in the first place, a lot of people don't need to be on these meds, but because of the environment they grew up in, now it has become where, you know, it's like, think of it like this. We're all born, if you will, blank slates. But different life experiences shape us to be a certain way, which is why we can be, you know, like this can be your next door neighbor and you're like, we grew up in the same neighborhood, but I came up like this and he ended up like this. And when we look at those factors, then we have to figure out, are we treating the environment that they grew up in and what they've been exposed to, or are we actually treating the mind? Because those medicines are for if you have something chemically imbalanced in your mind, not that you were affected by the environment, which, you know, manifests itself in the behavior that you exhibit on a daily basis. And that's what I do when I work with the kids. Sometimes, like I had a patient, to give you an example, who'd been diagnosed with bipolar most of her life. And she's like, I hate having this diagnosis. But as I listened to her life, I'm like, do you really have bipolar? You just had a life where you can't help but have, you know, not sure how to control your emotions. Because you grew up with, you know, parents that were addicted to crack. You know, were abused, sexually abused and raped several times over the years. And you can't trust people, so you keep to yourself. But then you want to trust people because that's life.
So your norm has become a diagnosis.
It's become a diagnosis.
That she has to accept.
That she has to accept. And, you know, and she, you know, people keep saying she needs to be on meds, and she was like, I'm gonna try going without meds for a year, and her moods have still been all over the place. But she feels better because she's actually in therapy working out those issues instead of using medicine. And it's all because we just had a simple conversation. Look at your, you know, background. I'm not gonna just say because you have moods, I'm looking at your symptoms. I'm saying what caused those symptoms. And then when you start thinking about it, then it becomes like, do you need that medicine? Don't get me wrong, there are people who need their medicine. I'm not saying that. But I always try to balance between, is that something, you know, chemically imbalanced in your head, or is it that environment has made you who you are?
And that's a very good point. And I know, I think you alluded to that earlier about if you get a diagnosis, some parents will put the child on the medication, and then the checks would get larger if the diagnosis was more complex. So there's that dynamic as well.
Well, that certainly doesn't help the growing crisis of the pills and overdoses, because this new drug, phenitol, is 100 times stronger than heroin.
Well, I mean, it's an elephant tranquilizer. How do elephants? So when we're dealing with an elephant tranquilizer being mixed in with this loaded marijuana that they're feeding called Kush and K2 that I
Excuse me. These are manufactured. Drugs.
But again, for me to say that, just what you said, how do fentanyl get in the hood?
Excuse me. They busted.
How do we get elephant tranquilizer? Ain't no elephants in the hood.
There was a bus over. I forgot how many millions of the pill was found. And
that was pressed. That was pressed with
already done. Somebody made. Now they said it was in another country. Could have been Russia. We don't know. We don't know. Russia is going to be involved again by way of. We don't know, because there's such an international trade and exploitation of the behaviors of drug addiction in America. Supposedly America is one of the largest Countries
importers of
that
drugs.
uses drugs.
Yes.
We make up
We
5.
don't even have a norm in America.
We make up 5% of the population in the world, but we make up 25% of the world's prisons, and we're the most consumed areas on wanting drugs in this country than any other country.
20 years from now.
Yes.
20 years from today. What is today?
28th.
August
The 28th, 2018. 20 years from now,
2038.
if this crisis, the magnitude of this crisis is not addressed, we still having natural disasters, fires in California, storms over here. Where do you think we're going to be?
But again, if we sit back knowing the position we're in today, we know the problems, we know what's happening. We went through the crack cocaine
Right.
era.
We did. That's right.
And we knew how it affected the community.
Oh, it
Yes.
messed them up.
And here we is now, the mayor sit down and he wrote an article that we haven't really been seeing the opioid crisis here in Texas like other states have.
Has not
But it's coming
fully
here.
hit us.
It's not fully hit us yet.
Wow. I thought it had.
But the results will increase. That means the judicial system, the judges, or the ones who are responsible, will either acquiesce and continue the status quo, right? Well, I mean, now you can't get any lower than 51 in America unless we going to bring in Puerto Rico. And I don't know if they want to come in right now, but the mental health people need is severe to the point where we're going to have to address our future.
But you show right, and we didn't hit on a topic, and I know it's getting, just like we dealing with the topic here, on even dealing with our girls in the suicide. Black girls is leading the list now with suicide. And we know that the number 2 killer on college campuses amongst our girls is suicide. So we got to, how do suicide fit in here with this mental illness? Because some of them, they say 90 is because depression.
Right.
Yes.
And if suicide is growing on that level amongst young black girls, then we're not paying attention because it's, it goes back to what we say, what is valuable in our community and what we put, and what we put value on. So
is that the new norm? That's why I started off the conversation.
I mean, I unfortunately had a patient who was a black woman who committed suicide in the last month, and she had been dealing with, challenges with her mental health. It had been homeless off and on because no one in her family would accepted that that's what she was going through.
Right.
And so what you say is real in the sense that we often are considered as black women like you're supposed to take on everything. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be able to take this on. You're supposed to be, take care of your children. Even if no one helps you, you have to do it. We don't have the assistance or help that other women of other ethnicities have. And often we don't even have the support of our families. And so when you have all these pressures put upon you, you feel like it will not get any better. On top of that, you feel like you're least desirable because studies show of all races of women, black women are least desirable. And if you're a young woman, you want to be desirable. So if that's what's going on in media, that you are not wanted, and for women at a young age, you want that love, you want that attention, then you are more susceptible to suicide because you feel like when you start thinking about suicide, it's because you feel like it will not get any better. You have lost all hope.
And that's what that sister, and she very, this book got to be promoted and got to be read, Black Pain, it only looked like we're not hurting, and just like she said, how black women have taken on a position of taking on the community, taking on leadership, being the top graduate of the college. They're taking on the mission of extra powers and strength, but they're trying to hold up and not show the pain that they're addressed. But because I read another article that, even in our own community with our women, 70% of our women, and they don't deal with it in our communities because been sexually violated in some way or for some form, and that internal pain that they're dealing with, they acted out in a lot of ways. A lot of them acted out and becoming leaders in the community. A lot of them acted out and dealing with depression. And like I said, bipolar have become one of the biggest issues amongst young ladies in our communities. And like I said, sometimes we look at it, they don't want to address it, we don't want to address it, because going back to black men, we're caught up in a system that we can't break in our own behaviors, dealing with our own problems, not coming to grip and admitting that we have personal issues such as depression, weaknesses, And like she was saying earlier, when I deal with my groups of boys, you know what I'm saying, it's easier to bypass the pain. It's easier to bypass sadness and go to anger, because that is much easier for people to recognize, and it's easier to be more aggressive, like you were saying earlier, when you see a lot of these young brothers running there and doing things that we don't even wonder, how would you do this here? A lot of the things that they're doing is a form of suicide
Yes,
on themselves.
exactly.
I wanted to chime in that, it's interesting that you raised the suicide rates among Black women. To contrast that, the numbers of the most educated women in America are African American women.
Okay.
So, but with that, I believe we have lost that community connection with everybody more or less not actually connecting with each other, but connecting on social media. We've lost that community where we would all get together and to be able to share experiences and go through it together. Somehow that is missing.
We
It's
don't
a
have a
new
sisterhood
missing.
at all.
Yes.
No sisterhood.
Wrap up, last minute thoughts. Each one of you, last minute. What should people be looking forward to? I'm thinking 20 years off. I might not be hosting this show, but 20 years off. What
Well,
do we need to do?
in the work that I've been doing, I've been out here on the front line working with our young men, because we have to, I live as an example, because if I can come out of the condition I was in, I think that we as a community, there's still hope there, because there was hope with me. Until we figure out how to bring hope, pride back to our communities, we can do this. We can change our condition overnight if we know how to unify and come together. It's not that we don't have the doctors, the lawyers, and most powerful minds on this earth. We just have to figure out how to unite and come together and say that we're going to do this self in a community form again. If we come in a community form again, think of self first and maybe others later, like everybody else. Donald Trump got it down. He know how to think of himself first.
That's an
and
interesting
the
book,
community
too.
self.
That's an interesting book. Black Pain. You might need to
Black
read
Pain,
that.
you know what I'm saying?
I'm just saying.
It only look like we not hurt.
Last comment.
And I think that we must do what we're doing tonight. Talk to each other, and start in love. I take time, and I try to do that, to answer my own phone sometimes, and to just talk to people just because they called or they need something. And nothing more than that, and share the resources with anyone. I mean, we cannot give more than we would ultimately receive. Just give it.
You mean through your professional
Just give
career
it through
or
our
through church and
yes,
community? Like
through
that?
our professional career as lawyers at my firm, in our churches, wherever we are volunteering, what we are passionate about. Just share in love and give that information away.
Very good. Like B1.
Yes, and for myself, I recently have a mental health or behavioral health clinic, and the name of our clinic is Future. And we named it that because we want to be different in how we look at mental health. Our motto is Heal the Everyday Mind, because we're trying to get rid of the stigma that people have with mental health. And so it is about how do we normalize just the idea of talking about mental health, so that people are like, oh wait, you're a psychologist, I don't know if I want to talk to you. People will pay thousands for a coach, but for a therapist, they're like, oh no, that's crazy, I can't do
Thought
that.
about it like that.
Yes, but the whole point is, how can we, begin to reach people and get them, comfortable with the idea of talking about, like you said, when they first start to have those, feelings and thoughts, and being able to express themselves. So one thing that I do personally, I'm actually going to start a girls group again, because I had one before, in terms of mentoring and helping them feel good about who they are as a Black woman. But one thing that I do, just on an everyday basis, I try to compliment somebody at least once a day. If I'm standing in line in the store and someone is frowned up, I'll find something about them, compliment, you have pretty eyes, or that's a nice shirt. And it's amazing how just saying something nice to someone will bring a smile on their face, even if they're like frowned up or not thinking about it. It is about realizing that no matter who you are, that you're still human, and that no matter what you're going through, we're all still human. And it's not that, even though we're talking about African Americans, I'll help anyone who needs the help, because we're all a human. I focus on African Americans just because of the pain that they continue to go through on a daily basis and not even aware they're going through pain. And I'm hoping that over time, not, you know, people will start to say and heal and say, I'm good. I am mentally healthy. I can cope with life stressors.
Very good. I want to say thank you to the panelists. This roundtable discussion again on mental health, and thank you again to Use Media Source, our host for over 30 years now, trying to give you information. And we certainly do encourage you to get you some help. This is not something to play with, regardless if you're dealing with it from a family perspective or natural disasters. Mental healthiness, I believe, should be the outcome of all of us, and certainly it gives you an opportunity to reach out. I know the 211 number is the United Way's number that can access you to a lot of resources that you might not know about, and certainly we're going to try to keep you informed here. If you stay tuned to Houston Media Source, Public Affairs, Public Access, I've been your host. I want to thank my panelists again for tremendous conversation. Robert McKinley Gilmore Sr., until we can meet again, you stay tuned and make sure you stay mentally healthy. Thank you very much. Good evening.